Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special edition of Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Jai, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In tonight's edition, we're going to be looking at Liberia's Bicentennial celebration. Is that this year, or is that going to be 2047? And what are some of the symbols and the theme of this year's Bicentennial celebration? There are some issues with it, and first to start with is the year of the diaspora. We have people going to Liberia. I'm part of that. This is something that I love, but there are some issues that Carl finds with the symbols and the theme of this year's celebration, and we're going to talk about that tonight. So sit tight, invite a friend, and let's go into history because this is our history. So we want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. My guest tonight, I have Ms. Carl Famula, who is FOL policy analyst. She has a deep interest in history, and she has been studying history since her youth. Carl, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Also joining us in a few minutes is Jason Carr. He's already submitted a dissertation for a PhD in history, and he studied Liberian history. So we're going to be looking at the bicentennial celebration of Liberia. Is it this year or is it 2047? And in that, we're going to be looking at, okay, when we say the 200 years, when do we start the 200 years? So we're going to do a background of this whole thing, when Liberia was founded, when the country Liberia we have today, when it got started, and when can we mark the bicentennial celebration of the country? And there are a whole lot of issues that are surrounding this thing. And we have this going on. And so we're going to be delving into that. Please invite a friend and let's study history. Carl, it's my pleasure having you. You're not strange to Focus on Liberia. This is your home. First of all, how's your weekend doing?
Great. Just relaxing, doing a lot of reading is what I enjoy.
Great. And I want to start with a kind of announcement of the year of, because I want to make it clear that the show tonight is not a knock or a criticism of what is being celebrated in Liberia. In fact, let me do this commercial. The Liberia Year of Diaspora Reunion 2021-2022. Let's go home. And we have a list of activities and events that are going to be taking place from December 19 all the way to December 20. So if you've not gotten on board yet to go to Liberia for the Year of the Diaspora, please make it your business to join the effort. And tomorrow we're going to be having Dr. Clarice Cooler here on Focus on Liberia to tell us all about the events, everything that will be going on during the Liberia Year of the Diaspora. Carl? Again, welcome. The Year of the Diaspora, there has been a lot of things concerning it, and you want to keep this thing, put it in some historical perspective.
Yes, because it's important. When you do national programs, it's not, I know that there's a lot of commercial activity. They're trying to generate tourism, but it's history. It's history. It's historical tourism. It's trying to generate activity around basically something extremely important, which is our identity as a country. So normally when things like this happen, there's a national standards organization, usually through something like the Ministry of Information and Culture, Tourism, and Foreign Affairs are supposed to collaborate to make sure that everything falls in line with our national theme. It doesn't seem like that happened. And that's because usually you would want to make reference, especially a country as old as Liberia, make reference to precedent that occurred before this one. And one of the things I noticed right away is that, oh my gosh, there's really no, continuation or even reference to what occurred in 1922, as opposed to what occurred in 1947. And when I heard about it, it was more about a year of diaspora. They were trying to, boost up tourism. And then the symbolism started coming out. And it was more than just year of diaspora. Now it becomes the 200th centennial for Liberia bicentennial. and I'm sorry, the 200th anniversary of Liberia, the Liberia Bicentennial. And I thought, my goodness, what is going on? This isn't where the country's not 200 years old. This is, not accurate. And so I think some of the confusion with people is what was in existence before 1847. What flag flew over Cape Mazarado, over Monrovia? Who was really in charge? Who was in control before 1847, and why was 1847 necessary? And 1847, that year, is one of the most important years in African world history.
Right.
What happened in 1847?
Let me stop you there. Hold that thought, because I want us to go back in the beginning. So you've introduced it, the problem that you have with the theme and the symbol, and where we can put the marker as the beginning of celebrating Liberia's bicentennial. Okay, but so we'll go back. We'll do a little history here, and our phone line is going to be open. We're going to have comments. We're going to put the number up shortly so that you two will join the conversation. So, putting this in context, we read from our history books. When I was in third grade, I remember Liberia was founded in 1822 by the American Colonization Society. This is what we know. This is what I learned in grade school in Liberia. Let's begin from there about the founding, or if I can put in quotation, the founding of Liberia. So let's start that history. How did Liberia come into being?
So there had been repatriation movements to Africa. The very first on record is after the American Revolution, 1776. There had been a lot of African Americans who fought on the side of the British. When the British lost the American Revolutionary War and the America gained its independence from England, those enslaved Africans, those freed Africans who fought against the United States on the side of the British, were then relocated by the British to Nova Scotia, Canada. Simultaneously, around that time, the transatlantic slave trade, the British government outlawed slavery and outlawed the importation of new slaves. So they needed to find a place on the coast of Africa to settle these people. And the place they chose is Freetown, which is now Sierra Leone. And they repatriated the African Americans that they had temporarily held in Nova Scotia to Freetown, along with some liberated British slaves. British people who had been formerly enslaved, and also captives that they were finding along the coast, or in transit, illegal transit into captivity. So Freetown became this place, Freetown, and this was all being organized by what's called the Sierra Leone Company. During this time, Paul Coffey, who is, his name Coffey is actually a distortion of the name Kofi. His father was Kofi, and he changed his name to Coffey. He was half, African and half Indigenous American. He owned his own ship. I mean, you can Google him. I'm not going to give you his whole biography, but he owned his own ship, essentially piled his ship with people, went to the west coast of Africa, which is now Sierra Leone, and had signed a treaty with local people, and then procured land to repatriate those people in what is now Sierra Leone. So there was this activity going on. So when the American Colonization Society had started, initially they were thinking about sending people out west, which was a wilderness, out the western part of the United States at that time in history was really a wilderness. They wanted to, just separate these free blacks from the rest of society. They didn't feel that they belonged among the citizens of the country, and they served as an inspiration towards people who were still enslaved. The majority of African people in America were still enslaved. So having liberated Africans living within the continental US served as an inspiration for them to run away and also reject slavery. So they wanted to remove these people from their midst. The American Colonization Society was being formed, and at the same time, in 1819, President James Monroe, which Monrovia is named after, he was president at the time, was authorized by the U.S. Congress through what's called the Slave Trade Act. to restore liberated Africans to their homeland, to West Africa. And so because Sierra Leone had been this place where everybody was going, the normal course of action would be to go to this region near Freetown and, set up a place for them to be. So the Elizabeth, the ship, the Elizabeth, which was the first to under ACS, was basically commissioned by the U.S. government. So the Elizabeth was commissioned by the U.S. government, and they took these people back. The vessel was being escorted by a U.S. military vessel because at that time in history, it was a complete war zone in the Atlantic Ocean. You had illegal slave traffic. You had all kinds of things going on. So you had to have a what do you call it? An escort vessel with arms, with cannons and things, just in case they were attacked. They landed in Cherbourg Islands. They gave them temporary stay. At this point in time in history, there were slave factories, which is where you have settled slave dealers all along the coast. Many of them were European, some of them were African. You had several mulattoes like the Tuckers of Sierra Leone. You had the, John S. Mill of Liberia. You had a lot of these people, well, not Liberia at the time, but of Cape Mesurado. So you had a lot of these people along the coast that were hostile to a group of former enslaved people who were abolitionists, and living in the vicinity of where they were doing business. So the people in Sierra Leone or Cherbourg Island, which was at the time, adjacent, not too far from Freetown, they didn't want these people here. There was a huge slave factory at Galenas. So they gave them this low-lying land that was swamp land. It wasn't conducive. Many, many people died. Eli Ayers, who was initially on the escort vessel, Dr. Ayers, and he went down the coast to try to look for more land. Went to Cape Mount, couldn't get anything, and finally, when he arrived at Cape Mesurado, there was a sovereign African, and I use this word sovereign African because that's important. Everyone at Cape Mesurado, these leaders were sovereign people. These were free people. So when he got there, John S. Mill was the first to negotiate and offer them a place to be and help them, introduce them to King Peter and King Zoda and all these others. So it was John S. Mill, who was a mulatto, as I'm using the language of the time period, but he was half African, half English, and he resided at Cape Mesurado. The other thing I want people to know is that at that time, Cape Mesurado was not some wilderness. This was a hub, an economic hub. This was a major area of trade and had been for several hundred years. So if you look at, maps from the 1500s, this is where people would come to get grain, ivory, human beings. This was a trade area. So many of the people that were there were accustomed to interacting with outsiders. Right. I don't want to keep rambling, but did I answer your question? As general history?
Right. So again, in context, we have this. I wonder, that's the act, the Third Congress of the United States. They have this act. I try to find out. It's kind of hard to read. So now they are finding a place for the former slaves or the ex-slaves, and basically they don't want them in their midst. They want to get them somewhere. Took them to Sierra Leone, as we read in our books.
Right.
And this place is they are dying because of the conditions there. So now they go into where we know today as Liberia to find, and the people doing this thing are white people, right? The ACS.
Right. So you have these wealthy Quakers. Quakers, for those of you who don't know, these are Christians. They're abolitionists. They don't believe in slavery, but they're also very racist. You can be an abolitionist and not believe that Black people need to live among you. You just don't think they should be living, in chattel slavery. They're not animals, but you don't see them as your equal. So these Quakers wanted to solve two problems. One, relieve their conscience of the burden of having human beings in captivity. And the second thing is rid their society of liberated Africans. So they put a lot of private resources into this ACS. You had government officials, you had private business people, philanthropists, slave owners, were giving money to ACS. And so ACS was a company. It was basically, people were paying into it and they were expecting something in return as well. So you're not only repatriating these people, but you're setting up a colony on the coast where you are going to be able to levy taxes on behalf of ACS and generate revenue. And two of the ways they did that was through trade, taxing ships that were coming to port. And secondly, the British were paying for the repatriation of rescued captives that were en route to slavery. And they were doing this with the Sierra Leone company, and they also started to pay the ACS similarly.
And ACS meaning the American Colonization
The
Society.
American Colonization
And why
Society.
was that name? So they were set up to colonize areas, to set up colonies. Is that why they were called the American Colonization Society?
Yes. So colonization has two meanings. If you look it up in the dictionary, a state colonizing another state, which is a government imposing its power upon another, and another version of colony is a settlement of people. Well, this was hybrid, because even though ACS technically was a private philanthropic, as they pretended, venture, the U.S. flag flew over the settlement. The U.S. flag flew over the settlement. It flew over their heads until independence.
Right.
So this idea, political sovereignty was not actually achieved until independence.
Right, and I'm going to come to that. Still laying the foundation here. So this ACS got to Liberia and negotiated for a land.
Right.
And they have this piece of land. And now the ship came, the first 88 ex-slaves came and settled. So walk me through that, the foundation, how we got settled, and what was it like? What was
everyone on the I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah, I said walk me through that process of the settlement, who were involved, and what was the authority, what was the government of the day when they got settled in at Cape Masurado.
Okay, so they were first landed at Sherbro. So the Elizabeth actually never made it to Cape Masurado. They were brought later on in two smaller vessels. The Elizabeth had returned.
Yeah.
So and many of the first group had perished. I think about 20 of the 88 repatriates died, along with the three of the European Americans that were along with them. When Eli Ayers went down the coast looking for land, he didn't go down the coast based on the historical record, and also in the context of what was occurring at that time period. He was negotiating with people who were extremely powerful. I know that we have been raised to think of our ancestors in a diminutive sense, that they were meek and weak and incapable of understanding what they were doing. But the historical record paints a different picture. The other thing I need to also make people to understand is that these people on the coast were not representative of everyone that is in the present day Liberia. So we have a long line of people living in these coastal regions that had been interacting with Europeans. Some of them were mixed race. Some of them were living adjacent and with Europeans that settled. So this was not something new. When it got there, as I said before, John S. Mill was a person who could read and write and speak English. He was educated in Liverpool. His father was English. He resided at Cape Masurado. And this was the first person to interact with Captain Ayers when he arrived and negotiate this land issue. So we have to always keep in mind, sovereign Africans, along with agents of the ACS, made this arrangement. Now, did all of the Africans in the vicinity agree with what King Peter did? And the answer to that is no.
And before you even delve into that,
Mm-hmm.
as you said, this was not, at this time, we don't have one group of people acting together. So, for instance, the group around Cape Masurado, probably they were a kingdom by themselves. If you went to what we know today as Mount Gibby, you'll find a different group there. If you go as far as what we have or Nimba, and
Right.
going down to, so these were different people, and they did not act together as if they had a unified state or territory.
That's correct. So King Peter's territory is what we consider Bushrod Island.
Okay.
And, King Peter, I know one of the things I also want to mention is that a lot of people have the misconception that the American Colonization Society or that the settlers named him King Peter. No, his name was King Peter, and his father's name was King Peter, and his grandfather's name was King Peter, going back to the early 1700s. So you have repeated interactions with Dutch, French, English, and then finally the Americans interacting with various people from different generations carrying this name, King Peter, Lord of Mesurado. So he was not the first. So we have a lot of information, historical record of John S. Mill from various sources, slave traders, British people who were trying to be abolitionists to stop the slave trade, from explorers, from people who were trading in other goods other than human beings, all documenting their interactions with people at Cape Mesurado over a period of 300 years. So those records are there and we can cross-reference them. There's no way that you're living in an area and you have 300 years of contact and interaction with people and that you're completely benighted and blind to the world. Many of these people, including the crewmen and other ethnic groups, had traveled and returned. So we have to really keep in mind that this particular treaty at Cape Mesurado did not represent the procurement of the entire Republic of Liberia. We're talking about a very small area of land for a settlement of a very small number of people. But even with that, it caused contention for the same reason it had strife at Sherbrooke. They were not interested in another Freetown on the coast, because in the vicinity of Freetown, you could not engage in the traffic of human beings. You could not do many, many things that you could do further down.
So the other leaders, along with King Peter in other areas, not everybody was welcoming, or not everybody participated in this negotiation, or in this negotiation for a piece of land to have the free slave settle.
Yeah, so I find it very strange, to be honest with you. And that's why I was hoping that Jason Carr could come on, because he's actually, his PhD dissertation that he just submitted is basically on Liberian history. And right. As far as I know, he's the only person.
He will be here.
Sorry, say that again?
Jason is coming. He's still on the road. He's going to be here.
Okay. So basically, let's just talk about it, because I have it here. So we have information about, little bit of information about King George, very, very small bits of information. We have a lot of information about King Peter and a lot of information about John S. Mill. Some of these other people, there's King George, there's King Long Peter, there's King Jimmy, there was another King Jimmy in Sierra Leone. I mean, we don't have a lot of information about them. Were they really kings? Were they just headmen? Were they generals? Military people? Who were these guys? Calling them king doesn't mean that they only had an empire or a kingdom, because clearly, if you're talking about such a small amount of land, all of these kings could not have interest in the small amount of land. So there could have been a couple of things happening. One, everybody just wanted a piece of whatever they were going to give. So they're trading, they're giving rum, they're giving stuff. Maybe they came around to get stuff. So there's a lot of this that we don't have solid answers to. What we do know for sure is that at least two of these signatories, at least two of them spoke English, and at least one of them could read and write, And the two that spoke English knew exactly what they were doing. They understood it because they had engaged in this before.
All right.
There were other treaties signed prior to this in the vicinity.
So 1822.
Mm-hmm.
So this is 1822 we're talking about now.
Yeah.
So when this treaty was signed, and then there is a whole lot of arguments concerning these treaties, guns to the head. I don't want us to go into that, but let's agree that there was some agreement that they came up to either on a coercion, on a duress, or freely, or openly, whatever. But there was something that they came up with. So at that 1822 signing and taking hold of the land, is that the foundation? Is that what we call the founding of Liberia?
No.
Why?
Because that is just settlement, and it's basically the founding of ACS presence. There's two reasons I say this. The first reason is the repatriated Africans were not signatories to the treaty. They were not invited to negotiate on their own behalf. This was a business arrangement between ACS and sovereign Africans for a place for ACS to settle the repatriated Africans they brought under their care.
What was the purpose of that resettlement, right? So they had a country in mind.
They absolutely did not. Again, they were modeling this after Sierra Leone, the Sierra Leone Company. This was a place for them to separate these people from themselves, but not to allow them to govern and control themselves as freemen. At that period of time in history, as the U.S. flag flew over Christopolis or Monrovia, whatever it became called after, when the U.S. flag flew over that land, even in 1847, when the Republic was created, slavery, chattel slavery, was still legal in the United States of America. So they never even had the concept that these people should be fully allowed to govern themselves. They needed to be put somewhere and then given a little bit of liberty, but not complete self-determination. And this is why 1847 became necessary, and this is why the insistence of independence and sovereignty was such a powerful move at that point in history.
Walk me through the governance structure. I know we have the Commonwealth period and this other period from 1822 all the way to 1847. So within that period, you don't still think that these people were governing themselves, even though they were still being controlled by the ACS somehow?
You can't govern yourself when every move, every decision is made by someone else. Let me give you a key example. Every every river, creek, road was named after sponsors of ACS. The capital itself named after Monroe, Stockton Creek. You know, all of these places named after. You're naming all of these places.
Carl, we are having trouble with your audio. Your audio is giving some trouble. So get that fixed, and we're going to be right back while you get it fixed.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jai.
Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. We are discussing the Bicentennial celebration of Liberia. Is that 2022 or 2047? My guess is Carl Famula and we are into this discussion. Carl, we're talking about 1822. So from 1822 to 1847, between there, we're talking about sovereignty, and you were
Right.
saying, hey, they were still everything was control, and the purpose of this mission also was to Christianize, right? To Christianize
Exactly.
the people they call savages, right? So having the names, name after people, from the ACS, I think that was part of the mission. I don't see that as a form of control, but go ahead, learn your thoughts.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I said that was their whole goal, right? To make the Africans like people from America. So the names they give them, the names they give places reflected that. But we're talking about self-governance because
Right.
from
So here,
1847, before
yeah, here's
1847.
what I meant by that. So if you have ownership and you have control, you would have been naming these places after the surviving settlers, right? You would have, the immigrants, the African repatriated immigrants would have had things named after them at that point in history, and they did not. And this is indicative of the mindset of the ACS. You did not have Hillary Teague, Creek. You did not have Elijah Johnson, River. We had a situation where they were naming everything after the sponsors. So there's two different mentalities here. You have the African Americans, the repatriated Africans, who are thinking about self-determination. In their minds, from day one, from their exodus from the United States, their intention was liberty. This was not the intention, the full intention of the sponsors of this program, because they wanted to still be there and still control the situation. And this is where the contention happened. This is why when Liberia asserted its independence, the United States did not recognize Liberia as sovereign until 1868. It was because it was resistance. It wasn't a peaceful or a friendly, amicable transition as you see in that handshake on the flyer. It was self-determination against the will of the American Colonization Society and the US government. And that is what makes 1847 important to not only Liberian history, but African world history.
You were saying Liberia was founded in 1822 is inaccurate.
I am saying what was established in 1822 was a series of colonies under the governance and control of various agents, and the US flag flew over those colonies. That is not Liberia. Liberia is represented by a flag, a constitution, and its sovereignty, 1847.
So now that brings us to the question of bicentennial celebration. I know bicentennial means 200 years.
Oh, yeah.
200 years. So it can be bicentennial of anything. I came to America the year 2000. So 200 years from now, I'll be celebrating my bicentennial of my arrival.
Right. So I don't think anyone has an issue with the word bicentennial.
Right.
But when you say Liberia bicentennial,
right,
that's a different thing. I mean, when you say 200 years of freedom, that's a different message.
What's the difference there?
So in 1922, and it's always good to reference the past. This is an old country. It's an old literate country, and our people documented things. In 1922, Charles D.B. King had a centenary celebration of the landing of ACS and the pioneers at Cape Mesurado. And it was clear messaging what they were celebrating in 1922. They were very clear and concise. I've gone through all of the programming from that time period that is available to me. I have researched this. I did not see any confusion. No one said 100 years of freedom. No one said Liberia is 100 years old until 1947. The 1922 centenary commemoration of Pioneer Day was clear and concise messaging about what it is that they were celebrating. This is important. And the reason is, if you put the emphasis on the landing, that means the father of Liberia is Eli Ayres. The father of Liberia, as many historians will say, is Hootie Ashman. And I disagree. I say it's Hillary Teague. I say it's Elijah Johnson. These are the people that stepped up and said, we are going to raise our own flag over our own heads. We will not have the flag of a slave-holding nation over our heads. We will be self-determinant. That was a powerful thing to do in 1847, when the entire African world was in disarray and under the control of European powers.
That was tough. So the question of sovereignty. Being controlled by the ACS telling you what to do, you're saying that's not sovereignty. So sovereignty actually came 1847 when the Declaration of Independence, when we announced to the world that now we are a free nation, and America through the ACS didn't like that.
Right. Because again, this was an investment. ACS was levying taxes. Ships would come in. This was a venture. People were investing, right? Ships would come in. They would tax the British vessels, the French vessels, whoever would come to port. Whenever the British would liberate a shipload of captives, that was revenue for ACS. And if you read all of these, and ACS very well documented everything that they did. They had reports, annual reports, and it showed how much revenue they were generating from these things. So this was being controlled. This was being controlled by white men, essentially.
Right.
And even when they allowed, before independence, even when they allowed Joseph Jenkins Roberts to serve as governor, if you read his correspondence with ACS, he was really just a stooge in a lot of ways. He was a surrogate for the authority. Independence was not only necessary, it was shocking audacity for African people to assert themselves in such a way at that time. And I mean, Haiti's revolution and Liberia's independence were two of the most, important things that occurred in the 19th century in African world history, in my opinion, of course.
Yeah. Haiti is to pay for that bigly.
They're still paying for it, and so are we.
Right.
We're paying for it too. We're paying for it. But we need to know who we are and what makes us important, what makes our history important.
January 7 used to be celebrated in Liberia as Pioneers Day. So from what you're saying, the 200 years actually should be the landing of the ex-slave or the arrival of the pioneers, so to speak, but not the founding of Liberia.
So I think they're getting caught up in semantics. That's why I always like to refer to history. Your messaging needs to be clear and concise. Our children are watching. Messaging on national events can serve to unite or to divide. Symbolism is very important. And you need people who are specialized in these kinds of things because the country is watching. And when you're putting on an event, yes, the historical accuracy is necessary, and also the symbolism needs to reflect what occurred in fact. And the messaging is foggy. Saying 200 years of freedom, Liberia Centennial with no specification of what about Liberia are you celebrating? If President Tubman celebrated the Liberia Centennial in 1947 and built Centennial Pavilion in 1947, that's the Liberia Centennial. If President Charles D.B. King in 1922 commemorated the centenary, the 100th anniversary of the landing, He was very specific. The messaging was clear and concise.
I remember the Declaration of Independence, right? Because Liberia wanted to trade with people, but anytime you say, "Well, who you think you are? You're not even independent. So what are you talking about?"
Right.
So it is clear that prior to 1847, we were not a sovereign state, and nobody wanted to even do business with us. So
nobody wanted to do business with the Africans, but they would do business with ACS agents. And there's so many examples of that. They would interact with ACS agents and treat them like human beings with respect, and they would mock and ridicule Liberian inspectors. You know, so the Liberian inspectors would go on board a ship, they would insult them, would not allow them on board, and they could do nothing to defend themselves. There are multiple, if you read, there's many different documentations of the disrespect that they had for the Liberians, especially the British and the French.
Let's come to the symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
First, start with the theme. Let me put on put this on the screen once more. It says Liberia Bicentennial, 1822 to 2022, the land of return. 200 years. Then down we say commemorating 200 years of freedom and Pan-African leadership. Let's start with that, commemorating 200 years of freedom and Pan-African leadership. How do you explain that?
I would, that'd be something that the designers and organizers that would have to explain. But as a person who did not design it, looking at it, it makes an assumption that freedom occurred when Eli Ayers, signed that document, or when the first, people arrived from Sherbro Island. And that's not historically accurate.
Why can't that be accurate? Because if you were living in America where you were not free, right? Even though you were free, you were ex-slaves, but still you wanted a home that you can call yours, especially back to the soil. So if you got to Liberia and you drink the water, you say, well, I'm totally free. From today, 1822, I'm free. 1822?
So the only thing that happened was a change in geography. They were still under the U.S. flag.
But call even Liberia, not even the way we profess to be free and sovereign, there's still some form of control from superpowers.
With our consent. With our consent. And so saying that is, again, thumbing our noses at our sovereignty. We don't have to do anything. We do that through our consent because that's what we choose to do.
Okay.
President Weah can get up right now and say, you know what, I want every American out of my country. He has the power and the sovereign power to do so. He's not going to do it for many other coercive reasons, but he does have the sovereign power to expel Americans from from Liberia with the consent of the Congress, of course.
He has the authority, but no power.
He has both. The will. It's a choice. And when you exert sovereignty, it is a choice. He has more power today than Elijah Johnson had in 1846.
To resist and say, not your flag anymore. So still talking about, so the 200 years here, I don't have a problem with it. It could be 200 years of the landing, but I don't know what it's called, land of the return.
Because people returned here, I think the original theme made so much sense, Year of the Diaspora. What Charles D.B. King did in 1922 was very clear. It wasn't confusing. In 1922, Charles D.B. King didn't say, Liberia is 100 years old, or he didn't say 100 years of freedom. That message didn't go out. The people that were on the Elizabeth were all liberated. Many of them were born free. Hillary Teague was not born into slavery. His father was a slave. He was the son of a slave, but he was not born into slavery. He was born free. These people were on the ship because they were free. And they came there because they wanted to be self-determinant. Self-determination was something that they wanted from the moment they arrived, and they were dissatisfied with being under the U.S. flag, and that's why Liberia was created in 1847 by African people who were on African soil, not by Hootie Ashman, not by Eli Ayers, not by Stockton. Liberia was created by African people on African soil, by their own courage, their own insistence.
200 years of freedom. If we look at it, because I know we can have it both ways, okay? And I think 2 years ago, I wrote a poem that Liberia means free. And what I was saying in that poem is we all came from somewhere. There were some early births, right? And everyone who came to the place we know today as Liberia came in search of some form of freedom from something, right? So there's a double messaging here, and let me know what you think. Because if we all traveling, right? So and we have, the Kwa speaking group, the different groups coming at different times. People, some walking, some in ship, some in boats, some in canoes, and now we're here. Highlighting and then marking the arrival of one group as the founding, I find it problematic. I think we need to correct that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean it's not accurate actually, because you have before I mean they arrived on top of people that were already there. Sovereign Africans made agreement and gave them place to stay. Sovereign Africans fought them. Sovereign Africans protected them. Sovereign Africans joined them before 1847. In fact, one of the first things that happened was Lot Carey started a mission, in Millsburg. He started in 1822. So this is the bicentennial of Lot Carey's mission. That's some of the stuff we should be talking about. I mean, if I would think there's so many great things. Lot Carey mission is 200 years old in 1822. I mean, in 2022. Lot Carey mission's whole purpose was to educate Native children. That was their mission, and make them Christian. It caused a lot of conflict because many of the people that Lot Carey was missioning to were from Muslim communities. So you had sovereign Africans who had a religion already, and even the ones who were not Muslim that he was catering to. Some of these Day and other ethnic children, they had their own traditions, their own belief systems. So all of these people also were not happy, about having these people come and minister to them.
And the name King Peter, from what you said, who knows? Maybe he was a Christian because Peter is from the Bible. So if someone had the name King Peter, 300 years prior, it's possible that, who knows?
And there is some evidence pointing to that, because there's anyway, that's probably for a different show, but there is some evidence that he may have been Christian. But because they also had a carving of a nativity, a mother and a child. So was that maybe an African deity? Or was it a replica of Mary and Jesus from the Bible? We don't know, but this is something that we're going to certainly continue to research and find out. But there are some people that believe that there was some form of Christianity. And of course, they had missions at Cape Mesurado. The Dutch had been there in the 1600s and had set up, churches and were missioning to people. So there could be remnants of that remaining a couple hundred years later as well. But these people that were on the coast, I think my biggest message today is that these were not ignorant savages. These were very, very sophisticated, exposed, and enlightened people that were accustomed to interacting and trading with Europeans. This was the case going all the way down to the Cavallo River. You have, a long history of this interaction on the coast. So this was not their first time seeing a ship or seeing white people or having someone ask for land.
But so the founding or the establishment of what we know today as Liberia, okay, from the history we read, it's like the ex-slaves came and established this. Who all became part of this establishment? There are people saying, hey, if the ex-slaves have not come, we have no Liberia. or was it a sole effort, or did those you call the sovereign Africans play any role that is crucial to what we have today as Liberia?
Okay.
Because the
So
200 years of freedom tells me that nobody else was free, right? But
yeah,
Africans
it's just
were.
a little bit of foggy messaging. And if I was a descendant of King Peter, you know, who was one of these people, were some of the first citizens when Liberia was not emancipated, when we asserted our sovereignty in 1847, there were many Day and Gola and Madingo and other groups that had already joined the settlement from up the St. Paul River. A lot of these children, right now, if you talk to the elders in Bomi and places like that, they still have oral tradition where they demonize Lot Carey because of him converting their children to Christianity. I mean, they passed this thing down for generations that Lot Carey is a demon because he, you know, came and then when the children became changed, they would go and join the settlement. They didn't want to go home. They didn't want to go and be, you know, part of their old ways of life. So people have to remember that these settlers were not living in isolation. And even from the very beginning, a lot of native, I don't like to use the word native, a lot of sovereign children of sovereign people were joining them in the settlement, and adults. And in fact, when King Peter was attacked by Gatamba.
Why you don't like to use the word native? What's wrong with that?
Because it has become where when people think of the word native, they think of it as being diminutive or like some primitive type of person. And they do this globally, not just in Africa. They do this when you talk about, oh, the natives are coming. It is used to.
What's about indigenous?
Indigenous is a good word, but right. Sovereign is a stronger word. These were free people.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if you just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. We are discussing Liberia Bicentennial celebration. There has been some controversy as to Liberia being 200 years old, starting 1822 to 2022. Carl is saying that's not the case. Our bicentennial celebration should be 2024, 2047. And so if you are just joining us, we're going to put the number on the screen there for you to join the discussion. It's scrolling there, 605-313-6004. The code is 791403. And we'll read some comments. I see one comment here from Dr. Samuel G. Toe, who wants to join the discussion. And so I've been called. So Dr. Toe, if you are listening, I sent you the link. Please join. This is what we do here. So let's read some comments here, Carl, and then you can respond at the same time. Please call in and get in the queue. Stephen Johnson said, Stephen, let's talk about the message. Call always.
That's my brother. Don't mind.
Lara Davis.
The safe and stay people in the house.
Abroad.
Thanks, Stephen.
Mohammed Salia Douglas is speaking with evidence. Mohammed also said they never had a concept for the settlers to govern themselves. And that's why even after 1847, USA refused to recognize Liberia a sovereign state for another decade. Adam Dolly, I'm learning a lot. Thanks, Carl. Samuel Toe, Carl is getting the intentions of settlement very wrong. The intentions of a permanent settlement and independent Black society was clear, known and anticipated far before the Elizabeth even sailed to Chevron. Dr. Doe, please come on and
come in and explain that one.
Explain that a little more. That the concept of a settle of being independent. Okay, so that was the question I asked you, right? That so the concept that we want a state, we want to govern ourselves, we want to be on our own, establish a country. They came with that concept. So buying the land and saying, hey, here is the land, that marks the beginning.
So no, because they didn't buy the land.
Please hold your thought. Let me welcome Dr. Samuel G. Toe. Dr. Toe, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you.
I can't see you, but okay.
Can you see me now, Carl?
Yes, you're in Liberia, right?
Yes, I am.
I can hear you, so it's okay. So. Go ahead, I'm listening.
So we can live with that.
I'm very sorry for having to crash your show like this, but
it's good you came.
there are a few points that I wanted to make. I've listened to Cole, and I think she has made some very excellent points, many of which I agree with, but some of which I disagree with, and I would like to make that disagreement as sharply as I can.
Sure. Thank you so much. So call and your thought, and we'll have Dr. To coming. Call, go ahead and your thought.
My thought about
They had the concept of coming to establish a country. So the
yeah,
first
of
day they
course.
came, and
For the
the land
Africans,
was
I mean, first of all, if you're even in North America, the audacity, the strength, the tenacity of the African Americans, even in North America, even the ones who did not repatriate, their goal has always been self-determination. This is not something that ACS gave them. This is something they championed. ACS now under the the disguise of wanting to do this, and there are many scholars that have written about this, and even at the time, their own language and their own explanations about what it is, what their intentions were. I mean, the newspaper articles when Elizabeth left New York, in the New York newspaper said, "Oh, 88 darkies have been deported back to their land of origin." These people did not have a pin of respect for African people. So the concept of self-determination was in the hearts and minds of the repatriates. ACS was looking for a place to keep them. And if you refer to the Act of 1819, it's also clear what they're doing in that act. They're trying to repatriate not only the captives, the recaptives, back to somewhere else away from them, but also free the United States of the nuisance of liberated Africans. And so there's a lot of that was going on. So this is an extremely racist time in history.
yeah.
But amongst all of that, the African people, the descendants of enslaved Africans, had enough courage and self-determination to assert and believe in their own liberation.
Thank you. Dr. To, welcome. What we're discussing is bicentennial. Did our bicentennial celebration 200 years begin at 1822? Let's start from there, and let me hear your thought.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I think the question and the debate is not new, by the way. Who and I and 200 years bicentennial committee is not engaging in this debate for the first time. We've had this debate. Scholars have asked this question, whether or not Liberia was founded in 1822 or 1847, and I think the correct answer is 1822. If you consider the fact that, and there are a number of other things that I quarrel with Cole for, and I will make those points known shortly. If you consider the establishment of Liberia, if you consider the first major act of the establishment of Liberia as a nation and as a state, as the settlement at Cape Mansurado in 1822, then you must agree that the founding of the country can be traced back there. And there are a number of reasons for this. Cole suggests a certain lack of consent in the collaboration between the ACS and repatriated Africans. I think there was quite a lot of collaboration, and correct me when I'm wrong, Cole. There were quite a lot of cooperation between repatriated Africans or Afro-Americans at the time and the ACS. Now, don't forget, what many Liberians fail to realize is that Liberia was originally founded as a settler state, not a state that King Peter was a citizen of, not a state that other Africans who had, were existing in Cape Mansurado were part of. The Liberian nation was originally a settler nation. That was the idea. over time, integration went on. Don't forget, the idea was civilization and Christianization, and to become part of that political community that settlers had organized, you had to both be civilized and Christianized. So there were processes of integration over time. There were other repatriates that came from other parts of the world, the Caribbean, the West Indies, and everything. So there, of course, and Cole makes another point that seemed to suggest that other than free African Americans, many other repatriates who came back to Liberia did not imagine themselves, as founding a nation, or that in fact
That's not what I said.
had no plan. Okay, I will correct myself if I'm misquoting you. But I want to point out that the ultimate aim, as far as the records show, even when the ACS went to the U.S. Congress to ask for money, and the evidence are there. There are members of Congress that's asking the ACS. One of the idea was to resettle free African Americans in Sierra Leone, and certain congressmen were asking, okay, we're sending these guys there when they're ready to become independent and they're capable of self-government. Can you assure us that the British will allow them to self-govern?
Which document are you referring to?
I think he froze there. Let him end because
I like reference documents. That is contradicting everything I've ever studied. These, and I will actually send you some files that you can show to support what I'm saying. I like when we talk about history to reference text and reference information that where we're getting this information. So I'm going to do that for you. Give me just a few moments. So essentially, the other thing I want to clear up until he comes back on is that I never said that the Africans did not want self-determination. I said that was not the goal of the white philanthropists who sponsored ACS, nor was it the goal of the agents. Otherwise, 1847 would have not been necessary. We would still have been continuing as Sierra Leone did. Why did we assert our independence in Sierra Leone? Freetown did not. Should be the question that people should be asking. And I have a couple ideas of why that might be as well.
All right, and I have a few questions for Dr. To even before I bring you in, but is this connected now? The first question is, was there a state called Liberia in 1822?
No, the name Liberia wasn't even the name Liberia was not even created until 1824, and it didn't even represent as much territory as what was later determined in 1847. The other thing is, for Dr. To, to be a political scientist and say that you're a country under someone else's flag is absurd. You cannot be a country under the US flag. This is international convention. You cannot be a country where your territory is owned by a private company called the American Colonization Society. You cannot be a country without your own sovereign territory, which they did not have.
And you can be a country, you can already be a country, and then 10 years later, you say you're declaring your independence, you are reading your declaration of and all that, right?
Right.
So I want Dr. To explain that. If we already had Liberia, if this country was established 1822, what was their need for 1822?
Exactly. And what's astonishing me is very intelligent people. This is just basic elementary political science, elementary civics. Very intelligent people are arguing against logic. Liberia was established in 1847 with the Declaration of Independence, with the creation of our Constitution and our flag. Calling a place Liberia does not mean that it's a country. Naming the country after Liberia because it means land of the free and you want to retain the name is where they're getting confused. It's the same thing with Sierra Leone.
And I don't think
retaining that name.
I don't
it's
think
the same thing with Sierra Leone. Liberia could have changed its name in 1847. There'd be no confusion, maybe. But I mean, the name is powerful. Land of the free. They kept the name because it meant something for them.
And I don't think this phenomena is not unique to Liberia.
Keeping the Sierra Leone kept their name. South Africa kept their name.
No, I mean coming to find a place and later on becoming a country, like even the U.S. when okay, Dr. To is back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry, guys.
I
had to.
We understand you're on.
Yes.
You're on Lone Star or Orange.
I'm on.
Don't answer.
I wanted to make another point before I get disconnected again.
I can't hear him. Hold on.
Sorry, can you hear me now? I wanted to make a.
Yeah, you're good.
Yes. I don't want you to start responding to call yet. I want to get your own position. You said Liberia was started 1822. I was asking, before you land your thought, was there a state called Liberia 1822? Was there a nation called Liberia 1822? And if you say that the Liberia was a settler state, so you're saying from the beginning, even when Liberia was established, Bushra Island was not part of Liberia, that where King Peter had his authority. So
no,
as you made your foundation, please talk to those few things.
Yes, the settlers had originally purchased Cape Mensurado. That is where the original settlement had started. All right. Of course, the Providence Island, they had named it, Providence Island after Bozo and everything. But once Cape Mensurado was started, that was the beginning of the story. There were numerous purchases of land that went along. There were numerous purchases of land that went both inland and along the coast. At the same time, many different states, U.S. states, were also coming in the vicinity of Liberia to organize colonies. Mississippi in Africa, Maryland in Africa. In fact, Maryland had declared itself an independent state until the rebels almost annihilated all of the settlers, and they had to appeal to the Monrovia colony to take Maryland over. All right. So Maryland was integrated into the Liberian society at that time, the Commonwealth, and so we had the colony of Monrovia. At Monrovia, we had it at Indana, we had at Sino, Indana Buchanan, by the way, Grand Bassa. We had it at Sino, and we had it at Maryland. So you have phases of the development of the Liberian nation. Right. If you can start the story from a particular point of the development of the Liberian nation, by the way, let me clarify that the term nation is used mostly sociologically in terms of the people. The state is an entirely different entity. The state exists as an institutional ensemble, right? I mean, even nations can be sovereign. And I mean, the question in 1847 wasn't a question of sovereignty. It wasn't a question of liberty. In fact, in 1847, the central question of the day, which led to independence, was the question of revenue. So there are two key points I want to make. There are two key points I want to make as I disagree with the code, right? The intentions of establishing an independent, self-governing nation was very clear before repatriation. Was clear among repatriates, including those who were manumitted, was also clear in the minds of ACS. I mean, the Americans did not want, the American government did not want to establish a colony. In fact, the only money that we know on officially, besides a number of other contracts that the US government had given the colonial government at Montserrat to resettle captured slaves and everything else, the only government give.
We're losing you.
Was 100? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, Dr. To, I want you to get to the point, right? You are telling me that in 1822, before 1847, we already have a sovereign state.
Well, a number of scholars have argued that Liberia was a state prior to 1847. I mean,
I use sovereign intentionally. Sovereign state.
Well, I mean, if who will describe the African kings as sovereign, and within similar definition, the political community that African Americans had established between 1822 and 1847 was also sovereign. But that is a question. The question of sovereignty is a question that is still a debate. I mean, I will argue that the Liberian nation was sovereign. The idea of sovereignty as being manifest through the Declaration of Independence was a colonial element. All right, sovereignty meant that you had a self-government, that you had a constitution. The Commonwealth had a constitution. That you had a defined population that you were ruling over. That your laws were being enforced. That you were civilized. At the time, civilization was also an element of sovereignty, statehood within the imperial world. So the settlement and the colony eventually had a system of laws that were governing them. They were enforcing their laws. They were trading with international partners. So they were a member of the international system. All right. They were collecting revenue, which is a function of the state. They had prisons. They had coercive power.
Even John Garang had that. Even John Garang was trading. But so trading with.
But the point I'm making is there's an argument to be made that the Liberian nation prior to 1847 was independent. In fact, Roberts made that argument when the British and the French came and said, well, as far as we're concerned, even the Americans have not recognized you, so we don't think you're independent. Roberts said, no,
that was after
every colony
1847.
does not have to exist in subjugation to an external political power. And so whether you like it or not, the power that ACS exercises on our behalf, which was at the time a foreign power, was a power that we agreed to give them. If we withdraw that power from the ACS will not be forced to represent us on the international scene. So it was the settlers, it was the community of settlers who at the time were a part of the Commonwealth who held sovereignty. And I want to make that point because it's very clear. I mean, the question of 1847 was not a question of sovereignty, it was not a question of liberty, it was not a question of peace. After all, the settlers have been governing themselves quite significantly. In fact, the ACS have from time to time propose that the settlers take over their own affairs. Now, don't forget, Roberts was now the first governor, which Roberts was a settler. There was also a colonial government and a colonial legislative council. So the issue of government was, by the time of the Commonwealth, almost entirely in the hands of settlers. I mean, the board of managers of the ACS was there. They were raising money for the colony. They were helping to repatriate people. They were making some decisions. But the actual everyday governance was in the hands of settlers, the Commonwealth at the time. So it doesn't, I mean, the contextual circumstances of the time does not lend any credence to any suggestion that Liberia was founded as a nation in 1847. What happened in 1847 was a declaration of independence so that foreign powers will begin to treat Liberia as an independent member of the international community.
Right, but that's the point. But thank you. Let me go to call for it.
And that was what President Tubman had in mind when he celebrated it in 1947. Because Tubman did not mince his words. He said this is the centennial of the founding of the republic. The centennial of the founding of the republic. But I would argue the Liberian nation had existed prior to the start of the republic in 1847.
Thank you. Call. This is no laughing matter. Go ahead.
I'm not laughing. I'm smiling.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't really, I think that the analysis and is just shocking to me. I actually do not see things that way at all, and the evidence that I've seen does not support that at all. First of all, the colony of Mississippi, if you read the process of how it was strictly established, again, by white Americans. The colony of Virginia in Africa, everyone that was signatory, the ultimate pinnacle of power went back to white men. Being a part of a colony, for example, the Gold Coast, it's like saying the Gold Coast was sovereign Africans. the Gold Coast was functioning as an extension of the British Crown. But yes, there were people in the Gold Coast that would wear uniforms and collect taxes, but they were ultimately flying the British flag over their heads. It's the same thing with Liberia. Liberia was flying the American flag over their heads. The colony of Mississippi was owned by a philanthropic group back in the United States. The colony of Virginia, they purchased land with money that was generated in the United States by white Americans, the signatories to all agreements, those who created these constitutions, the Commonwealth and laws of the Republic of, the Constitution and laws of the Commonwealth of Liberia. I have a copy of that. I'm going to actually share that with you. That does not look like sovereignty to me. That looks like, babysitting and control. And if you listen to Hillary Teague's numerous documented speeches, he's clear that they're trying to break away from the American Colonization Society and assert their freedom. And of course it was over taxation, because they weren't the ones collecting the resources. They weren't the one controlling the revenue. They weren't the ones controlling how money was going to be spent. Before J.J. Roberts, when he was made acting governor, made any decisions, he had to refer to the powers that be. And so this confusion to me is shocking. But, like I said, everyone has the right to view things the way they want to. That being said, the descendants of King Peter, who joined the settlement, were amongst the first Liberian citizens. King Peter himself and his clan that went, the other group that went to Millsburg, you had other people within Macerado that were incorporated before 1847. When Declaration of Independence was signed, those people were also citizens. I am not a descendant of anyone that was on the coast or anyone that was anywhere around there when 1847 occurred. I don't believe my ancestors in Nimba even knew that Liberia was asserting its independence. But that being said, the moment that happened, and the reason that date is important, the moment that Declaration of Independence was asserted is the reason why I'm not speaking French today. It's the reason why I'm not a Guinean citizen today. It is because of that territory, and I have ancestors who fought to protect it from French incursion. Some lost, and that part of the Liberian territory ended up in Guinea. But my point here is, it was 1847 that not only marked the independence of Liberia, but set a tone so that the rest of us would be under this flag, this Lone Star flag, as opposed to being under a Guinean flag or an Ivorian flag or a Sierra Leonean flag.
Thank
I'm having trouble hearing you, Dennis.
Let me bring in few of our callers here. We have callers lined up. They want to participate. Let's bring them in quickly. The first I have here is a wireless caller. Your area code is 706. Your name and where you calling from?
Yes, this is Darius Jabari. I'm calling this time from South Carolina.
Your name again, please?
Darius. I go by Jabari.
Oh, Jabari. Darius Lamb. Go ahead. You're live. Welcome, brother.
Yes, indeed. A great discussion being had. And I just want to point the significance of 1822 compared to 1847. 1847 is when Liberia transitioned, but the foundations, the roots, where everything starts in 1822 with that assignment of the purchase agreement. If that doesn't happen, Liberia doesn't exist as a nation state, period. You would have had the kingdom, but it wouldn't be a nation state, period, if it wasn't for 1822. So that's why it's the foundation.
Right.
Secondly, we tend to give too much credit or too much influence of the American Colonization Society instead of really giving credit to the Black founders and also the Black community in North America, because it was Paul Cuffey that gave Robert Finley, the person who started the American Colonization Society, the reason for it to happen. There were already Black Americans going there regardless. It's just the fact that many Black Americans needed money because at the time they were slaves. So once these slaves are free, they don't have any money. So they don't have it by any means unless they go through philanthropy, through slave owners to get to Africa. They don't have ships. They don't own this stuff.
Paul Coffey had a ship.
It's because of the grassroots that happened that really propelled Liberia to its point. And also, it negates the fact that Liberia would have been a much stronger nation had many African Americans had the ability. But as slavery became more entrenched in the Americas, American colonization society was becoming unpopular in many southern states. Therefore, financing went down. They couldn't finance as many trips, and it let Liberia become independent. So these factors need to be considered. So, yes.
So Darius, before you leave, I don't think 1822 being the foundation or being the start is in question, right? But is it the beginning? Is it the will you call that's the time we have the country Liberia, or is it 1847?
The country Liberia is 1847.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Let me go to our next caller here. Your 717 area code, your name and where you calling from?
This is James Davis calling from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Just to write to the people that I see Cole and my brother arguing about one another. But the truth of the matter here is, because God said that, and my brother, two of them, Testament of Sinners, they killed the African chiefs, and they bought land from them. So when they were buying the land, how was it people that made it? How did they call them? Were they Liberian, or were they just indigenous, or they were just bush followers? The first thing here is the Centennial, whatsoever they call it, the establishing Liberia. Those people they should ask, because if you look at the president, what is the name of the president? Yeyia is not American Liberian. Two is not American Liberian. All the people that are indigenous people that came from Liberian Empire within the West African states. So they should have invited the indigenous of the very West African states to not only looking at American people, but they're looking at the American colonization society group. They're not looking at those that came from all the empires in Africa. They're looking at people that were recaptured from Cameroon. Are they going to Congo? Are they going to Congo to ask the people what our forefathers that came from Liberia, where they came from? The recaptured story that settled in Congo town? Are they going to ask them too? Or are they only looking at people that come from America? In the first place, those people were sent by when the American colonization society came, they sent people to Liberia to find land for a suitable place for the African people. They were not looking at a suitable place to establish those people. They were bringing them for them to die. Actually, most Spaniards die only in Africa when they reach to Africa. When they reach to Sierra Leone already had the British people the money, and the people down there, they met Governor McCarthy. McCarthy directed them to go downward to African chiefs, that where they came, they bought some land for the people. And you can look at it, when they came with anger in them. They came with separation, they came with division. When they came with dividing themselves, they said, no, we cannot mingle ourselves with those people. Because they see that they were a little bit educated than the other people. But the establishment of the new called Liberia, it started when the people from America came. But the people, they already met people here. They met people here, people that came from other African countries, from other what they call. So I expected, because when you go to Maryland, they had the Bible and the Bible, they were there. The man and the gear, where they came from different parts of Africa. But what happened here, I just see my brothers and were organizing the organization. They're not paying attention to all other African countries that their indigenous came from. That's for their foundation, where they came from. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's take our last caller here. Is that Professor Larry David, Doc?
Hey, Dennis. Good evening and happy holidays to you. How are you?
Same here. Good. I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
Great. Yeah, a fantastic conversation tonight. And Dennis, I just wanted to say that I agree with your caller, Mrs. I think it's Mrs. Koa. Sorry if I mispronounced the name. I do think that the founders were Hillary Teague, Joseph Jenkins Robinson, and Locke Carey. But I also do want to say this, Dennis. If this is just my perspective, if the settlers did not come to and establish what is now Liberia, all of Africa would have been colonized, perhaps with the exception of Ethiopia, and that was colonized for 5 years. And so, in my mind, Liberia is symbolic. I mean, they maintained their autonomy even during the Berlin Conference, and so it was significant. And I'll say this one more time before I go: if these settlers did not come, that area of what is now called Liberia, it would have been absorbed by the British, the Germans, or the French.
Right.
And so Liberia is significant in that regard. Thanks so much for accepting my call, Dennis, and happy holidays to your family.
Thank you, and happy holidays to you as well.
So I want to respond. Sorry, Dennis. I want to respond to the last caller because I've given this a lot of thought and I've researched this quite a bit. There were African Americans at Sierra Leone with liberated Englishmen, with liberated captives, greater numbers. The difference between Sierra Leone, or let's say Freetown, and Monrovia is significant, and the distinction, because I've always struggled with this, because the policy of ACS and the policy of the Sierra Leone Company were the same. They were very, modeled after each other. They conducted themselves similarly. What was the difference with Liberia that didn't exist in Sierra Leone? The difference is, in Liberia, you had very early integration. Almost immediately upon the arrival. You had John S. Mill. You had others there working side by side with the indigenous people. And many of these people were incorporated, or not incorporated, but voluntarily lived among the settlers in the settlement. I believe, from what I'm looking at, the evidence is showing, it is that intercooperation and the support that held that place together. The perception that the society, I heard Dr. Cho say that the state was established for only settlers. That is not true. They did not impose themselves on other sovereign Africans, but they did not have any issue with integration. In fact, they encouraged it and built schools and tried to encourage people to increase their numbers. It is that early integration that saved the country on many levels. The protection that they received from indigenous people that cooperated with them and lived among them, the military support later on as the country developed. You had many of the people in the armed forces of Liberia that protected our sovereignty were indigenous people. I have an ancestor that held off the French. So this is not a simplistic story. It is a multi-faceted story. It is a complex story, and it involves many more players and many more actors than people like to say. The idea to erase and discount the contribution of indigenous sovereign Africans to the development of the Liberian state is unconscionable to me. And also,
go ahead, finish up.
Yeah, it's unconscionable to me. And the other caller that called saying, "Oh, you Paul Coffey," if you had listened to the show from the beginning, I was very clear about the repatriates, the African Americans that came, right after the Revolutionary War from Nova Scotia. I talked about Paul Coffey. I talked about his ship. I talked about him himself negotiating for territory, not going through a white agent, but he himself, Paul Coffey, purchased land from a sovereign indigenous African for the repatriation of the people that he had brought. So this is not the cooperation between people who returned and people who were there is downplayed, and that story needs to be told because it explains a lot and explains the sovereignty.
Thank you.
Right. If I can say anything, just to clarify, Cole, I did not suggest that the state was only made out of settlers. I mean, it was a 27.
I was talking about, I was
responding
to what Dr. Toe said in that statement. Sorry, I didn't mean to confuse that. That specific statement came from Dr. Toe, not you.
Yes, Dr. Toe speaking now. Is Dr. Toe speaking?
Oh, I can't see you move your mouth moving.
I'm right here, right here.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry. I thought I would call up.
I did not say that the Liberian nation or the Liberian state, whatever you want to term it, was only made out of settlers in 1847. I did not say that. I mean, the record shows that there were many Africans who had integrated within settler society, and by 1847 had become members of the general a settler society that was in the making over a period of 25 years between 1822 and 1847. So let's get that point clear. I mean, and you are right that over and over again, whenever we have these opportunities, it is important for us to emphasize the cooperation that went on between indigenous Africans and the settlers. I mean, the very purchase of the land itself had to go through high-stake diplomatic negotiations from the Ducal Conference 1 to a second Ducal Conference, for that matter. And it was only subsequent to the second Ducal Conference that, Cape Moserata was finally procured, and the settlers moved on in April of 1822. But what has to be agreed with is 1847 was not the founding of Liberia. Liberia existed prior to 1847. The question at 1847 was the question of revenue and whether the Liberian nation, as it was constituted at the time, had authority to collect customs revenue from British and French. That was the central question. I don't want.
Right, but what gives you the authority? That authority is given when you become a country.
Yes,
right.
Yes, statehood. Yeah. Now, don't forget. The Liberian, the colonial government, the Commonwealth government had been collecting customs revenue all along, internally as well as from international traders. Here come the British and the French, who are now contesting that authority. And so Roberts and everybody say, no, that authority is already vested in us, because as far as we are concerned, we are a sovereign state and we therefore have to have this power. And so to settle that question, to settle that central revenue question, Roberts, there was a whole, the conversation went on between 1941 and 47. I mean, the settlers were not ready at the time to declare independence, but it was to settle the revenue question. And so to say, okay, if you guys say we will declare independence, we will declare independence. We will write a constitution. We will declare independence, and we will have the right to collect customs revenue. It wasn't a question of whether you're free or whether you're independent. The settlers were already ruling themselves at the time.
No, they were not.
Within the Commonwealth. Of course they were. So for all intents and purposes, what the ACS was doing, now don't forget, after the Civil War in the United States, the ACS influence had all but waned. All right, the ACS had lost appeal because following the Civil War in the U.S., blacks had started to more vocally oppose colonization, which was one of the reasons why ACS had to turn its attention to the West Indies, to Barbados and Haiti and Jamaica.
Yeah, but the American Civil War was 1961. That had nothing to do with Liberia. The Civil War started in 1861.
Let me finish my point. I'm saying, no. If you follow what I'm saying, you will get the point I'm making.
I don't understand what you're saying.
The ACS influence had all but waned because even prior to the Civil War, there were opposition to colonization, by the way, and that even because if you read
African Americans were opposed.
If you read all of the correspondences, you will get the point very clear. And so there's no question about who's in charge of the Commonwealth. There is a legislative council. There's an agent who is a settler. There are courts. There are rules. In fact, there were subsequent laws of the colony and of the Commonwealth that were enforced, even though the ACS was raising funding for being a repatriation. I mean, if you see the record of repatriation between 1822 and even throughout independence, you will see that record of dwindling numbers to show that the ACS primary function at some point was simply to aid the repatriation But the Liberian
after
society was
independence.
already established. But
Dr.
even
Cho,
during the Commonwealth, yes.
Dr. Cho, let's look at the 25 years before 1847, before independence. So
Yes.
compare that. What changed in the way the country
Within
now
the 25 years?
Yeah, if you post independence and prior to independence, because we are talking
many
about
things change.
Right, and with reference to the ACS control. That's what I want you to say.
Well, many things change. I mean, during the colony, during the colony period, the ACS had its own agent, who was like the chief executive.
Exactly.
Later on in the colonial period, there was a colonial council. So there was a small legislative body that was constituted, made out of settlers themselves, who were part of the legislative council, even during the Commonwealth period. And by the way, the Commonwealth period ended in 39. So, but not the Commonwealth, the colony, I'm sorry, the colonial period ended in 39, and the Commonwealth period started at that point. At Commonwealth, it was the conglomeration of the coastal colonies that came into an alliance to become a Commonwealth of colonies. At Commonwealth, what's his name? Buchanan was the first governor. Subsequently, after Buchanan's death, Roberts took on the mantle, and there was also a colonial government, and there was a colonial council as well. So every infrastructure of a functioning state, I mean, it wasn't well developed, it wasn't modern, but every major infrastructure of a functioning state was in place. There was a constitution of the Commonwealth. There were tax collections of the Commonwealth. There were laws that were being enforced. The Liberian state was
those are not in dispute. Those are not in dispute. We also had the group in Maryland, the group in Buchanan. So to really state that, to really state that at this point,
did not exist a nation until
I said Liberia was established in 1847, period. Before that, you had a series of
historical sense.
It is a historical fact. That's what the facts show. You're talking about. You're describing colonialism. What you're describing is not sovereignty. What you're describing is what they fought against and asserted. If there was not an issue, the United States government would have acknowledged their sovereignty right away. Where was the struggle? You're talking about the Civil War and the ACS. Well, Liberia was already free. Liberia was already a country. It's not only the declaration, it is absolutely what created Liberia. Those commonwealths were abolished. Those commonwealths were abolished in 1847. They're not 200 years old. The colonies no longer exist. They were abolished in 1847, and Maryland joined Liberia in 1857, and was therefore the colony was abolished. When you don't abolish colonies, you don't abolish colonies. You don't abolish colonies. You do not abolish colonies and assert independence against yourself. Okay, that is just a false narrative. The people that listen to this show have gone to school. They understand basic political science. You do not have a sovereignty under a foreign flag. You have a U.S. flag flying over your head during a time the U.S. government is holding slaves in bondage, active chattel slavery in 60% of the country. And these people have this flag flying over their head and decide to break away. And yes, they needed to collect their own revenue. Why would there be an issue of the African people collecting the revenue if the ACS had not been doing so? You never heard of the colonial governors having an issue with collecting revenue from other white men. This was an issue of racism. This was an issue of
there's a small contradiction. There's a small contradiction.
Let me finish my point, and you can come back.
I think
the whole rambling that about ACS and all of this stuff, it's completely irrelevant. There are three elements to a state: land, sovereignty, laws. They had no land; it belonged to ACS until 1847. They had no full sovereignty. They were under the U.S. flag. Their laws were laws of a commonwealth. They were not in charge of their own destiny. It was the assertion of the 1847 Constitution that provided them with the power to determine their own destiny. That's why that period is significant.
Thank you. Dr. Toro, you go second. We go to our comments. Time is fast spent.
The first contradiction I want to point out is if independence was the cause of sovereignty, if sovereignty did not exist until after independence, and the Americans were saying, okay, you're not sovereign, we're not going to recognize you, then the Americans should have automatically recognized Liberia following independence. But sovereignty was not a question. Sovereignty was not a question because of recognition. Recognition was a colonial element of statehood because colonial powers wanted to regulate who.
But Great Britain recognized Liberia right away.
Yeah, but that's the point I'm making. I mean, if you're saying following independence, then sovereignty is automatic. Then it will surprise everyone why the United States did not still recognize Liberia
because they did not want to let go of control. Because that's who they were rebelling against. That's who they were breaking away from.
What do you mean?
That's whose flag they pulled down. They pulled the U.S. flag down and erected the Liberian flag.
Hold on, Dr. Toro, speak to the flag issue. Which flag was flying over Liberia before 1847?
Well, initially it was the American flag, but you and I know very well that the Americans have remained quite ambivalent as to their actual relationship with the
because
American
they don't want to be seen as a colonial power, but the flag was flying over Liberia.
The American government, and you check the diplomatic correspondences between the ACS, the American government, the British government, you see the American government being ambivalent, never agreeing that they had control over Liberia. And Roberts made that point as well. I mean, I hear Cole making the same argument that the British...
I'm just stating facts. The
British commander made, right? The British commander was making the fact that you guys are coming from America. As far as we're concerned, you are under America. If America cannot recognize you, there's no way you can be sovereign. That's the exact same argument that Cole is making. If we declare independence, that means we have to declare it from someone else or from another political authority. That is not necessarily the case.
That's what happened, though. They wrote this stuff down. I mean, this is the thing that's shocking me. These people wrote this down. Hillary T was literate. He wrote this down. They talked about why they were doing it. In fact, let me read it.
Go ahead.
Hold on. We will soon end. I want to bring in my comments, and then we'll be hitting the 2 hours mark. Dr. Toro, how do you address the issue of the flag? The flag that was flying before 1847 was the American flag, right?
Well, there are many of the settlers who had still argued that they were citizens of America. They had still they saw themselves as being citizens of America, as being members of that political community, when in actuality the American state had rejected them. Plus, you have to understand
my point
the influence.
Is, if they saw themselves as citizens of America and flying the American flag, will you still say we have a country called Liberia at that before 1847?
They were Americans.
The name was not even given to the place yet. You and I are
let's forget name, but we're talking about
but you and I are speaking in retrospect, right? There would have been more diplomatic and practical reasons why it made sense to fly the American flag and not the British flag or another flag, right? The Americans were, the Americans had political, military, and diplomatic clout, for example.
No, I understand the reason.
They were not viewed
how can you call
as the
us
same
a sovereign
way as
state
the British
if we are flying another country's flag?
Had originated, at least the first group of them, had originated from America, and they viewed themselves still as part of that society. So it made sense, not necessarily for statehood purposes, but it made sense to fly the American flag and not the British or any other flag. So it made practical sense. But I am saying the fact that they flew the American flag does not necessarily say that they are a colonial holding of the United States, because even the United States rejected that fact.
Thank you. Let me bring in a few comments here. We have 15 minutes to end the show. Akina Wesley said, permit me to inject my 2 cents in as much an intellectual exchange as this. Disagreements are not cruelly presented, rather euphemistic. Oh, Wesley, man, don't make big words. Instead of you are wrong, it is academic culture to say I beg to disagree. your argument is flawed, punch some holes in your argument. I hold a dissenting view. A note of caution to Comrade Dr. Gito. This is an epitome of a civilized intellectual discourse. If you made on the whole, such a discourse is extremely useful and healed. There's a question here from Roslyn asking, what is this whole thing about? Okay, we have
derail the whole conversation.
Dennis, you cannot pretend that you want people to participate on your show. Do not keep people on the phone, not only for you to hang up on them disrespectfully. It is your show. You do not have to pretend. Some of us can easily boycott your show if that's what you. Aliu, I did not hang up. This is a phone line that we are controlling. Sometimes it goes off. So, and I'm trying to do the engineering of the show, interview, and do all these things at once. So sometimes we have these technical errors. Nobody is disrespecting you. Mohammed Salia, Dr. Toure is describing a scenario of a powerful ACS controlling the direction and JJ Roberts governing according to the directives of the ACS. Kamini Fandoa, the Bicentennial is a field trip for those diaspora Liberians. Mohammed said, can you please ask Dr. Toure about specific theme of the upcoming Bicentennial program? How should we call it? Moses Keller, my sister.
I mean, on that question, I agree with Cole.
Was integration really that easy when there was so much wars between the settlers and the indigenous? Nancy Cole said, we always condemn what other people do. What are you doing since you know better about the Bicentennial? Again, Nancy, we are not condemning the Bicentennial. If I had the means, I will attend myself, but we're just trying to put this in historical context. Roslyn Bentley, so what is the main point of this discussion? Is it about Bicentennial celebration or is it about the clarification of the ATS? It is about, when we say Bicentennial, it means 200 years. Do we start counting the 200 years from 1822 or from 1847 when we got our independence? That's the crux of the matter. And then Carl also have problem with the symbol and some of the theme of this year's celebration. Hamilton's Billy, with all those events spoken about, you guys have not placed any timelines on them. Speaking on generality is good, but historical accounts go along with timelines. Jimmy, ACS lost its momentum because Africans were not encouraged by events in Liberia. Tales of sickness and death had dissuaded many not to return.
And a lot of people left. A lot of people left and returned to the United States. Even some people refused to go forward to Cape Mazzarato. I mean, those are some of the things I wanted to get into the discussion. There was a rebellion against ACS right at Sherbrooke. Some of the repatriates, even though there was sickness and death, refused to go forward to Mazzarato. They didn't take everyone with them. And some of their descendants are Sierra Leoneans today. So this is a very complicated story. It's not some simple process. There's also situations where people left the colony and went and lived with the indigenous people because there were other nations, states, sovereign empires even existing simultaneously with these people settling. You know, King Massaqua's empire to the west, nobody talks about that. They later on became part of Liberia. You want to tell me that the Massaquais and the Fambulas were not sovereign? They've been free for 200 years? I mean, this is something that we need to work on. The messaging has to be more respectful to the truth of history. That is what we're saying.
Thank you, Dr. Toure.
All right. Yes, I mean, if Ku and I agree that the 200-year Bicentennial.
What do you call me, Ku?
Okay. Let me take you through the orientation. Her name is Ko. You see, in Nimba, we have two. We have Ko and Ko. Okay. So Ko or Ko, that's the first female of the mother. So it's different.
Okay. Which pronunciation do you prefer?
Region to the other is different. So it's Ko.
Which pronunciation do you prefer, Ko?
Ko.
I'm Ko. K-A-U, Ko.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, I mean, what you and I agree on is that the 200-year Bicentennial is in fact the 200 years of the arrival of the first group of settlers, but it is also the point at which we can trace the founding of the country we now know as Liberia. And and the point you make is very important, that we have to stress the level of cooperation, the level of independence, but also the agency of Africans. I mean, they were sovereign at the time, of course, and 25 years of existence between 1822 and 1847 also would imply that the African American state or settlement was also sovereign in the same vein. And as as we go forward, one of my criticisms of this current bicentennial, and by the way, I hope no one is misconstruing and thinking that I represent the bicentennial community. I'm not in government. I'm just a simple academic who has been interested in these issues. One of my criticisms is we should emphasize the reconciliatory element of the bicentennial. I mean, we have an anti-American Liberian politics prevailing in this country at the moment. How come we want to celebrate the arrival of American Liberians ancestors, but we don't want to include them? You're essentially celebrating the return of a group of people who you reject in your contemporary politics. And so we have to be very sensitive about all of that. I mean, academics, I had to write a critical review of the bicentennial before there was some feedback that the University of Liberia had been invited to the committee, for example. That had not happened. Now I know that Dr. Allen and other people are now on the committee, and they are giving some advice. So all of these are important. I'm hoping to complete my book on Liberia's role in the making of the contemporary multilateral world that we know now. Hopefully in 2022, that might also coincide with the bicentennial, and we may have more debates and more topics to discuss.
So it is either the bicentennial of the arrival of the ex-slave, or the bicentennial of the founding of Liberia, or the bicentennial. And since we all came at different time, well, maybe it's left with Dr. To and the rest from the southeast to have their own bicentennial, where the core people came to the coast.
That's not even bicentennial. That's not even bicentennial. That's what happened 500 years ago.
Okay.
I'm happy to accept the bicentennial of the founding. I'm happy to accept the bicentennial of the arrival of the pioneers. Those two interpretations, in my view, would be correct.
All right. Let us wind this down. Thank you so much, and Dr. To, thanks for jumping in. To continue the discussion. This is just the beginning.
Right.
There is always a problem, as one writer said, with a single source. So it's better that we hear both sides. Chinua Achebe said, until the lions learn to write, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And my brother-in-law is one of them. So we have to tell our own story, and we cannot depend on a single source. We have to get it from Carl, we get it from Dr. To, we get it from me, we get it from Jackie and the rest of us. Okay, so Liberians, we should be open-minded to accept this. This is not a criticism of the good effort Dr.
No, it's not.
Clarence, Kula, and the rest are doing. And if I have the means, in fact, Focus on Liberia is dispatching our chief administrative officer to be part of the bicentennial celebration in Monrovia and do some interviews, take pictures, and play the recordings right here on Focus on Liberia. Again, thank you. Let me get your closing comments. Starting with you, Dr. To.
I think there's a great discussion, Dennis. I would love to see you continue. Cole, you and I have many discussions at many different levels, and I would like to see these exchanges continue. They can only be good for our country.
So thanks, Dr. To and Dennis. When we look at history, it's good to see the world through our own eyes, from our own perspective. As we read other people's writings from time periods that we didn't live in.
Hold on, Carl. We have a caller. Caller, please be very brief. You have 29 seconds. Your name and where you calling from?
My name is Mohammed Saleh Dukle. I'm calling from Sydney. I just want to ask Dr. To, by the way, are you Blood Nation?
No, Dr. To is not Blood Nation. Blood Nation is different. It's a choppy challenge. I know him.
No, I don't think I am Blood Nation. Not at all. Never been.
Are you serious? Is that what you call for? Call continue.
Oh, Dr. To did not deserve that. So I was saying we have to see things through our own eyes, through our own prism. And that is a challenge for a lot of scholars, to put themselves not in the eyes of the slave trader or the colonialist or the white supremacist who wrote the document, but to put yourself in the shoes of your ancestors at that place and time, even if they were not the ones writing the story. And it will have a profound impact on the way you see history and see the world. It is something that I strive to do every time I read a text. What was our position in the world at this time, and how would we have seen this from our point of view? So the fact that Liberia not only became sovereign, but remained sovereign was through collective effort of everyone. Because if sovereignty was so easy to attain, Sierra Leone and other places that had settlers would have become sovereign. So my sincere appeal to those that are doing the messaging, the imaging for this program for the country. I know it's a big commercial event and everybody's gonna go down there, we're gonna spend money, we're gonna do what we have to do to promote it. But I want the messaging to be more clear, concise, and inclusive of factual details in history. Liberia was built and incorporated within its territory numerous empires. We were not one group of homogenous Africans all doing the same things with the same culture, with the same beliefs. We had many different nations, states within the territory, remnants of which still exist to this day. So that's something that I want everyone to remember. There are sovereign Africans that have remained sovereign from the very inception of time.
Thank you so much. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., we're going to have The Liberian Dream with Neo Napolo Johnson. Then at 4 p.m., we have On Point, Liberty Party in Crisis. Oh, no, sorry. Tomorrow, On Point is, there'll be an interview from On Point by, of Nant Beje, who reportedly, his daughter was reportedly, I call that attempted murder. I don't call it, raping a 7-year-old is not rape, it's attempted murder. The attempted murder of his daughter, he will be right here and focus on about 4 p.m. on Point. Then at 6, on primetime Sunday, we're going to have some current issues. U.S. Treasury sanctions Senator Prince Johnson. Councilor Tiawan Gonglo launched his presidential bid, and police set to remove Country Devil blockade from Local Bridge. All these happening here on Focus on Liberia. You don't want to miss it. And I don't know if you watched the Country Devil press conference, Dr. Phil. But thank you so much.
I'm gonna go to Lofa. I'm going to Lofa to go interview the Country Devil.
You don't interview Devil. But thank you so much. I want to thank those viewing, watching us, and even those who will watch later. Keep it here at Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Until then, whether you came to Liberia, and this is your bicentennial, whether you came on foot, like the vine, the Gola, walking through there. I read from history that when when they reached to Sierra Leone, they say, "Conon, let's wait here." And then the other people who proceeded to Liberia, they became the vine. So whether you came on foot or you got through the ship, wherever you are, we are all Liberians. right?
All
Whether
right.
your ancestors were there before my ancestors, we are all Liberians. That is what is important. And we must do everything to make Liberia that glorious land of liberty. And that's why we always end with the song that says, we are all Liberians. Good night and God bless you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Liberia is our home. Liberia people.